Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheilla, and our story today is called The Greatest Gift. Well, Juan, he was 14 years old. He was cold, he was hungry, and he was leaning against a stone wall. 3 years ago, Juan had had a mother and a father, but then sickness had come, and they had both died, leaving Juan with no one, no home to live in, nothing. And he'd been out on the streets of Mexico ever since. Well, as he stood there, he looked this way and he looked that way. And then he saw, catty-cornered down the street, a small marketplace church. And then he remembered something. That church had a place where you could go to have food. And the last time he'd been there, as he was eating what food they provided, he noticed that right by the door of the church, there was a square donation box with a lid on it. You could lift the lid and you could put donations in it. He thought, a donation box means money. His stomach was growling. He hadn't eaten all day. Well, except for the fact that he'd come by the fruit cart on the street and he'd reached out and snatched, yes, snatched, he'd stolen a banana. And he ran down the street with the banana clutched in his hand. And the man that owned the food cart had yelled all kinds of bad things after him. But the banana was long since gone. He was hungry. So he looked and he looked. Finally, there was nobody walking on the street from either side. He took one more look to make sure, and then as fast as he could go, he ran across the street, straight to that church. And he ran up the steps, and he opened the lid of that donation box. And he stuck his hand inside, and he pulled out a whole handful of pesos. But in fact, it was a big handful. It was about worth $24 in our money. And he thought, that's a lot of money. It's enough to have good meals every day for a week or more. Well, as he was looking at his hand, suddenly behind him, he heard a loud yell. Stop, you thief! And Juan knew that the voice was talking about him. He swung around, and he didn't have time to look around to see which way would be the right place for him to flee. He just started to run blindly, clutching those pesos in his hand. And because he wasn't looking where he was going, he ran smack into a police officer. And that big, burly police officer reached out and grabbed him by the shoulders. And he said, so you're the thief that's been stealing the money from the donation box. You're stealing from the church. Juan, he lowered his head. He'd never stolen from the church before, but he was a thief. The police officer, he said, I'm gonna take you to the prison and lock you up with all the other criminals. And Juan thought, well, while this conversation was going on, the door to the church opened, and out came a pale, brown-haired man with glasses. And the police officer was just getting started with his ranting, and he said, you're a criminal. I am taking you to prison right now. Well, the man up on the steps, he turned to the police officer and he said, no, he's not a thief. He's just hungry. And the police officer said, I saw him being a thief. He looked at the man standing on the church steps, and he didn't dare to hope that he could help him. But the man got closer, and he said to the police officer, he said, I'll take him. And the police officer said, he probably doesn't have a home to go back to, which was true. And the man from the church said, well, then I can provide him a home. He's coming with me. The police officer said, well, if that's what you want, I warned you. Well, the police officer went on his way, and Juan followed the man to the door of the church, and he opened the door, and he turned to Juan, and he said, come in, welcome home. Well, Juan came in, but then he wondered, surely this must be a mistake. And as if the man, whose name was William Walson, could read his mind, he turned to Juan and he said, it's no mistake. I have an extra bedroom and you can live in it. You can stay here with me. Juan couldn't believe it. And then William Walson turned and he looked at him again and he said, I just bet that you're starving. Come on, I have some beans and tortillas. So William and Juan went to the big wooden table and sat down. And William got beans and tortillas, just like he promised Juan. Well, Juan, he started eating. And he had some of those beans and tortillas. Well, he ended up having 3 helpings of beans. He was so hungry. Well, then it was bedtime. And William said, well, come on. I can see that you're dirty, and it's probably been a while since you've had a bath. You can have a bath now. And William went off to find him some clean clothes. Then William took Juan to that little bedroom, a bedroom all his own. And he had a soft bed. He reached down, he pushed down on it, and it actually had covers on it and sheets. And wonder of wonders, he had a pillow. Those are things that he hadn't had for over 3 years. 3 very long years. A couple weeks passed, and Juan was loving living there with William. You know, he had asked William, "Why would you do this for somebody you don't even know?" William, he looked thoughtfully at Juan and he said, "It's because God gave us Jesus, and Jesus came here to this earth to live, and Jesus loved us just like God the Father did. He came here to earth even before we knew that we needed him. So I'm just doing what he would have done." And Juan marveled because he didn't know Jesus yet. Well, then there was a knock on that big church door, and William and Juan went to the door, and there stood 2, not 1, but 2 police officers. And Juan, his eyes got big and he thought, "They've come back to take me away." But that wasn't what they were there for. Behind them were 8 children. 8. And the officer said, "Do you want these orphans too?" And Juan thought, "Oh, William will just look at them in disgust and say, 'No.' But William, he looked at them and he said, 'Of course I'll take them. Come on in.'" Those 8 boys were standing there. They were looking around, and they looked afraid. And one stood straight, and he came over to them, and he said, "You don't have to be afraid. You're safe here." So they squeezed those 8 boys in, and they had enough blankets, and they had enough beans, and so they were fine. Juan, he looked at William that night and he said, well, he started to laugh. And William looked at him and said, "What is it, Juan?" And Juan said, "I just thought of something. We need a bigger house." And William said, "You're right, Juan. We need a bigger house." So that very day, William Lawson went out and he looked all around and he found what used to be a warehouse, but he could afford it. And he bought it, and he moved the boys and himself into it. By the next week, they had 13 kids. Now it wasn't just boys, it was little boys and little girls. And within a few months, they had 100 boys and girls living in that warehouse. Then Juan was listening to the news on the radio, and he looked at William and he said, "There's been a hurricane, and Veracruz is flooded, and hundreds of people have died And they say there's little orphan children running all over the place in the water of the flood. William, you have to go get them. And William said, but we hardly have enough beans and tortillas for the 100 children that are here. And we don't have enough blankets. And you know what Juan said? Juan said, well, we can share. That's what Jesus did. He came from heaven and he shared with us. We know of a need. We can be like him. And the other boys, they nodded their heads. And the little girls, they nodded their heads. Yes, they were all willing to share, like Juan said. So William, with tears running down his eyes, said, I gotta go get them then. And he went to Veracruz. And he saved as many of those little orphan children as he could find. And he brought them home. Well, that warehouse, it was simple and it was clean, but it was warm and full of love. They had named that house Our Little Brother and Sisters. That was in 1954. And over the next 50 years, William took care of over 18,000 orphan children. He provided for their simple needs, and the house was full of love. You know, boys and girls, that's what Jesus would have wanted. That's the way he feels about us. He's in heaven going, I want to bring them home. I can take care of them. And he wants every single one of you. And one of these days, he's going to come to get you. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. You may be only one person in the world, but you may be all the world to one child.